In advance of the Alaska summit, I suggested that President Putin came in with several objectives, all of them relatively obvious from things that he said and things that Russia have done over recent months. First, he wanted to turn up, the honoured guest of a President of the United States, which is a big change from the pariah status he'd been treated with by the West since 2022 and his invasion of Ukraine. Second, he wanted to fend off calls for an immediate ceasefire, since he wants to continue making gains on the battlefield ahead of any final peace deal. Third, he wanted to achieve that while talking Trump down from any inclination he might have to slap punitive secondary tariffs on the countries that currently buy Russian oil and gas. Now, according to Trump's rhetoric in advance, it should not have been possible to achieve item 2 and item 3 together. Trump had said that if Putin didn't seem to be up for a deal on a ceasefire, he was going to walk away from the table, possibly within 2 minutes. He also said that if a deal wasn't forthcoming, he would be hitting Russia hard with very harsh measures straight afterwards. And yet, on those basics, Putin got exactly what he wanted. Remarkable theatre, with Trump having the red carpet rolled out for him, Trump even applauding him as he walked towards him. Objective 1, tick. On Objective 2, not only did Trump come away having not gotten a ceasefire, he came away persuaded that the best thing was to forget any idea of a ceasefire, to move straight on to negotiating a final peace at some point. So no ceasefire, tick. Then on Objective 3, well, we don't know what might follow in the next coming days or weeks, because Trump can be unpredictable, but the absence of punitive action against Russia has so far been one of a few genuinely predictable constants in his behaviour, and so it seemed here. No mention of secondary sanctions or any sanction at all. Some very vague rhetoric about all the progress that had been made. We'd agreed on most things, just not one very big thing. Given all the positive progress, he said later, probably wouldn't need to be talking about those sanctions or tariffs, certainly not for several weeks. I'm guessing possibly not even ever. Now, this is the most intriguing part, because by all the concrete signs from the unfolding events, this summit did not go well for the American side. I mean, as predicted. Because I pointed out just a couple of days ago that normally this sort of event would have extensive preparation by expert staffers, a lot of work being carried out to evaluate the other side's positions, their strengths and their weaknesses, all the history, all the psychological evaluations of people who are going to be on the table, all of it. The Russians have done that work. They're known for extensive preparation in advance of these sorts of summits. And they came in with clearly agreed and understood objectives, with a negotiating strategy, with various signals they wanted to send. Trump came in barely able to elucidate what his objectives were, because he fired all the experts. He likely did very little preparation for this, save being lobbied extensively by Europeans who were trying to coach him into at least understanding what he wasn't allowed to give away. He wanted a ceasefire. He said that much. We knew that. He didn't know it was possible, he said, but he would be very disappointed if he didn't get a ceasefire at this summit. He really wanted to get the sense from Putin that an end to the war was possible, that Trump could be the one who makes it happen, and that as a result there could be great commercial deals, Nobel Peace Prizes, yada yada yada. And he trusted his freewheeling style, which serves him so well when he's bullying less powerful countries, so he was happy to just go with his gut. So how do we know that things didn't go well? The original plan was that the talks would go on for longer, and then the 3-on-3 meeting would be opened out with the financial figures for a working lunch. But those talks finished early. He didn't, of course, leave after 2 minutes, as he said he would if he'd sussed out that Putin wasn't up for a deal. Putin would have failed if that had happened. Obviously, the Russian team had plenty to make it sound as though they were wholly engaged to prevent that from happening. But the talks finished early regardless. Most tellingly, that lunch with all the finance guys that had come along for the ride, that did not happen. Many commentators felt that when Trump came out of the talks, he looked tired and deflated. Not sure whether to read too much into that. I mean, it's easy to project meaning onto such things, but old men who have journeyed long and had an intense 3-hour negotiation, they're kind of allowed to look tired in my book. But the talks did finish early, the lunch was cancelled, there was no deal. So it's hard to say that the defeat was purely one of projection. In which case, you may be wondering, why didn't Trump come out and say not enough progress had been made, he would be proceeding to slap on secondary tariffs as he previously threatened? That is the question. Instead, they retreated to the only lines available to them to save face. Lots of praise for each other, and to begin the other predicted process we discussed before, deflecting blame onto others. So both of them had talked about so much progress had been made, neither said anything specific to support that. Putin praised his host fulsomely, stroked his ego by repeating Trump's ridiculous line about how the war would never have started if he'd been president, and Putin said that he only hoped that with all the progress having been made, that the dastardly Europeans and Ukrainians wouldn't throw a spanner in the works. Trump said they'd made so much progress, but there was one big item that they couldn't get over the line. Maybe that one would need President Zelensky to get it done. Yes, we've been making fabulous progress. Details unimportant. The only way this big, beautiful process could be spoiled would be if President Zelensky says no, or something similar. But even this was offered up half-heartedly, because they clearly couldn't give any specifics about the supposed progress that had been made, probably because there wasn't any. What Zelensky was supposed to say yes to that was in any way different to what Putin has been demanding all along, unspecified, almost certainly for a good reason. As the Ukrainians have been saying, they do not need the Americans' help to surrender to Putin. Now, the end of the summit also did not go to plan. Journalists have been told that if the talks failed, there would be no joint appearance at the end. Trump would come out solo, having sent President Putin on his way. If they had reached a deal, then they would both come out, and in both cases, questions would be taken. After Ukraine's President Zelensky was humiliated in the White House back in March, I said then that none of the strongman leaders that Trump respects would ever be subjected to that sort of process, because they and their teams would never permit it, for one thing. So it's no surprise that when it turned out that Putin and Trump actually were going to appear together, even though there was no deal, so they could perform their face-saving formula, questions from journalists would not be taken. Normally, Trump, of course, loves taking questions from journalists. So some concluded that this was purely a demonstration of Russia demanding limits to the process and getting their way. And that does kind of seem likely. But unlike on the journey to Alaska, reportedly on the way back from Alaska, Trump also did not take questions from journalists, which smacks of how badly things had gone wrong. Trump and his team still busy processing it and trying to work out how to spin it into a success when he finally got to speak to a tame journalist, which he did thereafter, namely Sean Hannity. Putin, of course, didn't answer questions to anybody. At least he had one journalist shouting questions at him when he was arriving, asking whether he would commit to stop killing civilians. Of course, Putin pretended not to hear that particular question, because of course he did. So, pretty slim pickings for the journalists. Remember, these guys had all flown for 8 hours to be at this summit. They got short statements going in, no questions. Short statements coming out, no questions. They got exactly what the rest of us got watching it on YouTube or wherever you watched it. So, what happens next? Trump said that he wanted a follow-up meeting to be organised quickly, and for that one to include President Zelensky. From what I've seen, it's totally ambiguous as to whether the Russian side actually agreed to the idea of Zelensky being present at the next meeting. And this shouldn't be a surprise, because assuming that the only real progress in Alaska was that Trump was educated a little bit better on the real strength of the barriers to peace, shocked out of his ego and complacency, then it's hard to see what would be achieved by that three-way meeting. Putin is not ready to give up on his core maximalist goals. There were some emerging reports that he was prepared to finesse his demands for certain territories, so long as he got the whole of Donbass, and those were minor details compared to what he describes as resolving the root causes of the conflict, which remains the case. In any case, Ukraine is not ready to surrender to those goals, so they would not even be talking about having a summit between them if Trump hadn't dived in with his totally naive special envoy Steve Witkoff, setting up meetings with no plan, then being shocked when no breakthroughs resulted. Right now, Trump is talking about missing out the ceasefire and going straight to the peace talks. He thinks that's fast-tracking the process that will eventually result in peace. But clearly it's not. All it's doing is meeting Vladimir Putin's objective of delaying any pause to the fighting while Russia continues to make progress. And while some of these sources at least are telling him, maybe accurately, maybe not, that Ukraine is just weeks away from a major collapse on the front line. So it's yet more illusion of jam tomorrow as opposed to real progress today. Still, Zelensky and the Europeans will try to make the most out of the situation, seeking to bring Trump more firmly on side, less likely to do something unscripted and stupid to the further benefit of Putin and anti-Ukraine. So Zelensky will meet Trump in person in Washington on Monday. Reasonably good chance there will be no Oval Office debacle this time. The Europeans are busy flattering Trump. For instance, Britain's Keir Starmer saying that the end of the Ukraine war is closer than ever, thanks to Trump, which is the kind of public bullshit we now have to listen to on a regular basis as the Europeans vie with President Putin to see who can manipulate the nuclear-armed toddler the best. But let's be clear, as far as America's involvement in this process goes, we are stuck in a doom loop. Trump will not fully back Ukraine to the degree of sanctioning Russia, providing any sort of support to Ukraine that wasn't paid for by someone else. Firstly, because he still covets partnership with Putin and Russia for reasons that seem unshakable as well as rather hard to understand. Secondly, because he doesn't care much about Ukraine or indeed anyone else outside of what they can do for him. I mean, that's just taking the evidence of his behaviour from the last 6 months and, of course, the repeated definition of America first. So Trump won't do that. At the same time, Russia isn't going to stop because of something that America says or does. It is following the battleground logic only, playing its own cards, in its own game, in its own way. Playing America off against its enemies in Ukraine and Europe, that is just one of the more powerful cards it's been able to utilise, so it will keep trying to do so. And you can't say it's not been working to date. Then add to all of that Trump's inability to walk away from the process. Because yes, as we've said countless times now, he needs to be at the centre of attention. He needs it to be about him. It's why he's, to all appearances, gutted that his feeble pitch in Alaska didn't bear fruit. So yes, he will seek to organise a second meeting. He will seek more threats, more deadlines, more drama. But the space for doing so is narrowing, as it becomes increasingly hard to pretend that his interference, his illegitimate negotiations, any of that is actually making any difference or has any chance of doing so in the future. How does this show end? With increasing desperation and dwindling substance from Trump, for sure. What matters is what's happening on the ground in Ukraine and in Russia. That was true in 2022. It was true last year, 2024. It is still true today in 2025.